Hello, hi. So here we are at our next lecture on weightlifting. The previous two we've done very interesting ones. One is bodybuilding, part of gyms, powerlifting, part of gyms, and now here we are at weightlifting. So we're going to find out what are the differences between these three, okay? And what is it that we can learn, what is it that we can incorporate, what is it that we shouldn't, and how are these three different? Like I said right in the beginning, is it just about big powerful person or powerful looking people who are strong, have a lot of muscles, or do they do different things in these three? So you know what is bodybuilding, you know what is powerlifting. Let's get to now what is weightlifting. So weightlifting, the term is again a bit of a misnomer. Powerlifting is somewhere where you actually lift weight at a slower speed, but you lift a lot of weight, but that's called powerlifting, right? And weightlifting is actually where you do powerlifting. If you've followed the lectures, you will understand this. Now, why is weightlifting? I call it that it is actually where you lift with power, because in weightlifting, you do lifts which are done at a very, very high speed. And these are done at a high speed with extremely good technique as well, because of the fact that the weight has to be lifted overhead. So between powerlifting and weightlifting, as I had mentioned in the previous lecture, weightlifting requires you to lift the bar to travel for a maximum distance. This is the highest point that you can lift any weight in any exercise. What's the highest point that you can lift a bar to? It is obviously above the head. So when your arms are extended. A squat, the bar is at this level, goes down and up. A bicep curl, it's here. Many exercises where they do with cables, it's not going above the head. Here you're lifting the weight which is at its highest point, okay, furthest away from gravity. And what's between gravity and the bar? It's you. So this is a sport which has basically two lifts. One is called the snatch and one is called the clean and jerk. Now in the snatch, one of the differences is that the grip is a lot wider. This person here has done a snatch, and how you can know is from the width of the grip. It's very wide. In the snatch, when they lift, they hold the bar, they swing it up in one motion, okay, and the aim is to get it up straight as fast as you can, and then after a bit of dip in the hips, okay, you stand up, okay, but the aim is to get it in one flow, okay. Now if somebody wants to get the bar up in one flow, if it had to be where their arms were closer, it would be a lot harder and the range would become even longer, okay, from here to go and keeping your arms straight. There's no, in this lift, there is not much, elbow bending that happens. So obviously they want to, it's almost like a swing up, okay. So it's one motion where they want to swing the bar up and then get it up, and it has its own benefits. It's a powerful motion, there's a lot of explosiveness that comes in, which is required. Now the second lift which is done is called the clean and jerk. As the name suggests, there's sort of two parts to it. There's what's called the clean and then there's jerk. The clean is where the grip will be a bit closer of the hands and they will get the bar here to this level, okay. Once it is here and it's resting, then there's a bit of a pause and then there's a split that they will do, and that split squat position is when at that precise moment the bar is also pushed up. So it's where the body goes down, bar goes up, and ultimately you stand and then you hold and then you drop the weight. Now if you watch any of the Olympic competitions, you will know that this is an Olympic sport. You will see strong people come into the Olympics and they do these lifts, and doing these lifts is more technical than a powerlifting lift. Now why is it that it's more technical? Because simple, powerlifting, when you do a lift, you end up lifting, and as you've lifted, you will make sure that you just hold the bar and you can take it up and down. Here it is not good enough to just have strength. This is very high levels of skill, and it's not just high levels of skill, it's also high levels of speed and body control. Now you might say, how come this has more body control? Imagine a person carrying weight over their head, which is heavy weight, they are holding it there, versus a person carrying weight on their shoulders. On the shoulder, the surface area, the contact area is much higher compared to somebody just holding such a huge amount of weight only in their hands. The surface area of contact is very less. So in a squat, a person would of course be lifting a lot more weight than what a weightlifter would, because the area to place that bar is a much broader area. So, and plus you have your hands to hold, plus the range is less. So obviously a squat you can lift a lot more than what you would lift in weightlifting. But here the difference is that you are lifting very high, carrying the weight in your hands, but at the same time you are also doing it with technique. You have to swing, you have to get under the bar at the right time, and that is where there's technique. It's a lift which requires a lot of technique. At the same time, it's also a lift which requires coordination between your body parts, between knowing. It's something which you have to be knowing how to do. Let's put it that way. Now, between powerlifting and this, if I have to give an example to make you understand like what are the lifts in powerlifting, then let's say you're a person who has decent amount of strength, okay, and you want to check your squat 1 RM, okay, especially 1 RM if you're going to check your max. And let's assume you're somebody who's been training in the gym, you've been doing squats, heavy, light, this, that, and you've been doing some amount of bench presses, even deadlifts. And if you're told that, okay, let's just see how much you can squat once or bench press or deadlift, you can say that mostly you would be able to do that lift to a large extent safely, and most likely maybe not get injured and be also able to complete the lift. Now, when it comes to weightlifting, if you've never done a clean and jerk, if you've never done a snatch, are you going to be able to do it? No, because there's a certain specific skill of getting under the bar, catching it and then standing up. Okay, the range is a lot more. So for a new person, is definitely not something that they can do. Now here's something interesting, because weightlifting moves, variations of these lifts, which are such as power cleans, are used a lot by many strength and conditioning coaches. Now, it's important for us to understand that weightlifting with these two lifts specifically, snatch and clean and jerk, is a sport in itself. Now, this part is important to understand because a lot of people assume and believe that if you are doing strength and conditioning, you have to be incorporating these lifts. Now, is that the correct approach? Is that actually necessary, that you have to be lifting and you have to be doing clean and jerk? And somebody comes to you, could be a cricketer, could be a football player, could be any sport person. Do you first check, do they require force to be produced, especially in this direction? And I'm talking about powerlifting and even weightlifting. Do they require weight where they heave it up and the body moves in a certain way where sort of it learns to lift weight overhead? In a particular sport, is that movement required? And if it's required, absolutely yes, then it makes sense. But does every sport require that? Now, this is something we have to ask ourselves, okay? Something interesting to also know, that as it's a sport, it requires technique, and that technique can take years to master. Sometimes good technique comes, and that's why there are some champions in this world, right? Like in the first lecture which I've done about the physical and the technical, what is it that we said? What are matches won on? What are medals given for? The medals are given for the technique. So weightlifting has technique involved, and that's the reason why it's an Olympic sport. So when we end up sometimes, maybe knowingly, unknowingly, possibly we teach our students to do Olympic lifts. We are teaching them a sport. Is that sport going to help them to do their sport, their personal sport better? It's like you are teaching them two sports. Okay, they already have a sport, and then you're teaching them something else to do with weights, which is an Olympic sport. So it's like sometimes, a case where they say a cricket player, and you're saying, okay, you have to do weightlifting. You're teaching them an Olympic lifting sport technique, and then saying now you have to play cricket as well. Is it going to help them? Is it necessary? This is something we have to ask ourselves. Okay, so weightlifting is a very explosive sport, but then so is shot put. In shot put, you see these big guys, they're explosive. They can, in fact, they go through a transverse plane, they spin, and then they throw. Now, are you going to teach your player shot put so that they can do a tennis serve better? Because there's rotation that happens in tennis. Are you going to tell your boxer to learn shot put so that they spin and throw? Because obviously a boxer can benefit. We can have that argument that that's also a strength sport. If Olympic lifting is a good sport for giving us some transfer, shot put also can help. So these are wise questions and wise answers we have to think of. Okay, and you have to get into specifics then to understand what to do. But if you just do something because that's what every person is doing, or that's what we assume that you have to do these lifts, you have to sometimes ask, what is going on? Am I doing this sport of weightlifting for something that will help me, or am I a weightlifter myself? What am I using weightlifting for? And if there is some benefit of it, how much? For what? What is the sport I'm doing? Am I doing just because I believe that, this is what I've seen everybody do, like you should be doing? There are sometimes these maybe even cultural kind of or traditional norms that come in, like, where we do certain exercises because, hey, but everybody is doing that. I've seen, these top coaches make them, people do clean and jerks. Really, is that important? Have you taken into account if that athlete, from the point of individualization, do they have a history of doing this? Do they know the technique? Have they mastered the skill? And if you then want them to master the skill, do you ask, is their body able to take this? How's their nutrition? And if you're going to master the skill, when I have, as a strength coach, maybe an hour and a half with a player, do I make him do things which actually strengthen him for the ranges, for the planes of motions that he or she is going to use? Or do I want them to learn a skill in a sport in the gym, which is completely different, and I'm going to spend a lot of times correcting his or her skills about just doing a snatch, maybe just doing a clean and jerk, just to spend so much time in learning a technique, and which maybe is never the best, because the best ones are the ones with the champions, right? So it's just like I said about shot put, or maybe even javelin. It's a sport which requires tremendous amount of power. You have a run up and then you throw the javelin, and there's so much power, there's so much rotation. Now, should a tennis player throw a javelin because the action is sort of similar? They have a run up, of course, but still there's so much powerful rotation. So then should a tennis player learn to throw a javelin, because that's also an explosive sport? Shot put, should they learn? In the short amount of time that you have with the player to train, do you make them do these lifts because that is how it is? This is something to ask, okay? And this is something to ask yourself. And good strength and conditioning coaches, experienced strength and conditioning coaches know exactly what to take, what to put in. And others just sort of think this is maybe what works. Okay, why is it being done? What's the training history of the athlete? What's the age? What's the lifting experience? They've never done? What's their injury status? Have they had shoulder issues? And if it's all against, let's say there's somebody who's a very young athlete, comes who doesn't have much protein in their diet, is structurally maybe an ectomorph, doesn't really have very strong, maybe a very strong structure, okay, has not trained in the gym, has a very good technical game, but they are not extremely strong. Are you going to say no, but strength and conditioning, you have to do snatch, you have to do clean and jerk? And let's assume that player also had a shoulder injury or a back injury. So you're going to tell that person that no, but strength and conditioning means you have to do these, and you're going to keep teaching them how to do a snatch, how to do a clean and jerk. Do you want to spend your time there? Is it really going to transfer, or most likely is it going to hurt? So a lot of times these lifts can hurt as well. Like the saying goes, and I always say this, exercise is like medicine. It can cure you, it can kill you. And also exercise can make your body, and exercise can break your body. So you have to be clever enough to know exactly what to get out of each. Don't become a fan of any one style of training. Okay? So you should never become a fan of weightlifting. Don't become a fan of powerlifting, nor bodybuilding, nor anything. Don't become a fanboy, the term that is used, for somebody who just is a believer and a very staunch believer. There's nothing that is the best. Okay? So weightlifting, you need to know what it is. You need to know how it is different from powerlifting, from bodybuilding, and then use accordingly, use judiciously. Okay? So now coming to what is weightlifting? We've spoken about this. Weightlifting is a test of pure power, strength and speed. Now the third point, interesting, and I'm going to make a note here. Some of you who have an idea would know that here, this one, and this will be one of the questions I'll ask in the test. There is a mistake here. I made a mistake in this particular point. Okay, I wanted to put 3 to 8 reps. Okay, but I ended up putting 8 to 10. So I have done due diligence and informed you that this is a mistake. The reps here are 3 to 8. So if you are listening to this lecture carefully, you know that the rep range that is used in training is 3 to 8 with power movements. The reason is because 3 for those who are into competitive lifting, 8 is for maybe athletes who do these. So there's still some amount of force and a good blend of force and speed. Because if the bar is very light, and if you're doing it with the highest speed, it doesn't serve much purpose. Okay, but at the same time, if it has a decent amount of weight, which you can do for 8 reps, you'll still have the benefit of having speed and power. Otherwise, it's just speed and there's no benefit of having load. So the rep range for weightlifting is 3 to 8, which is generally used. So keep this in mind. If you've been listening, you will know when the question comes. Now, what's the other feature in weightlifting? There are 3 attempts, just like in powerlifting. Each lift has 3. You have the clean and jerk and snatch. Okay, so you have these lifts which are done. You could watch some videos which will give you an idea of Olympic weightlifting, how it happens, and then you can also get an idea there when people have failed lifts. And of course, if you watch both powerlifting and weightlifting, okay, there are a lot of accidents that happen when people are doing competitive, and the weight sometimes just lands the wrong way, or they miss part of the technique. And there are some, not great videos to watch, but you can check it on the internet to know exactly what are the drawbacks that can happen. Okay, and especially weightlifting, maybe more than powerlifting, you'll find weightlifting videos, because of the greater range, the falls and the drops can be sometimes very dangerous. Now in that, knowing this, okay, do you want to make your athletes go through this? Teach them something which is completely different to their sport, teach those skills, and then also take the chance of them having to lift something where if something goes wrong, it is more nasty. Again, this is food for thought. Think about it. What is the other feature of weightlifting? Is that it has a greater range of motion. We've spoken about that. The bar, you can see this gentleman who's got it. If he's holding the bar there, imagine when he started, the bar was here on the ground, right? So from somewhere around mid shin, it has right now traveled up to here. So that's a massive amount of distance. If he had to be doing bench press, if he lies down, you can see the distance was only this much here. If he's doing squat, he would have taken the bar from here to just down here and this. Okay, if he was doing a deadlift, his arms would be holding the bar, just lifting this much. So range wise, you can just see from how much this is. So greater the range and greater the speed, greater the load, greater the risk. Okay. So this gentleman now, if he's going to lift from here to here, if the bar breaks at any point, breaks as in a break in form, then there's a great risk that he's taking. Whereas if he was doing a squat, the risk is only from here to here. Most probably when they go down, he's not able to come back up, but still there'll be spotters. And yes, another very important sort of difference between powerlifting and this is that in weightlifting there's no immediate spotters. So if the bar goes off, it goes off. From that height, if you're not able to hold it, and if it goes down, and that's why I said there are some very nasty injuries that can happen, and you can check some videos to get an idea of how dangerous it can be for even top competitors, some of the best in the world. When they're competing, that can happen. So the risk factor for general athletes who don't have a history, we have to really ask, how important is it, and does every sport need it? Okay. So greater range of motion, greater injury chances, and I'll come to that point a bit later about injuries in this. This is an Olympic sport, unlike powerlifting. So we have to remember that this is different to the sport of powerlifting, because this is in Olympics. So a medal in the Olympics, we obviously know how much is the value, okay, of that. So now coming to the first one, okay, we get back to the slide where we've got all three pictures: bodybuilding, we've got powerlifting and weightlifting. Now, how can these three strong individuals get injured if they have to? Okay. So let's say the powerlifter, what is it that can get them injured, and what is it that we should know not to do? So for the powerlifter, it will be simple: the heavier the weight, the greater the chances of injury. Okay. Technique wise, the powerlifter doing something wrong is less, because the bar travels for just a short period. In this particular incident, if you see in a bench press lift, the bar will only travel here, touch the chest and go up. So doing something wrong between this is very low, unless the weight is so heavy that when it comes down, she is not able to push it up. But then the advantage here is there's always spotters around. There's two people. Spotters are people who stand here, and there will be one here. So they quickly hold, when they can't lift. So there's generally okay, they don't have this risk. Okay. Here, when he's going up, if he's not able to control, it's too heavy, and sometimes he'll walk, they'll have these staggered steps, front, back. It's literally they are having their life in their hands. When you're carrying this much weight in your hands, you are literally sometimes carrying your life in your hand, because something can go wrong and can go really drastically wrong here. Okay. So one thing for her will be the weight, which is most likely going to do her harm if she can't lift. In this case, it is not just the weight, there are two other factors, and this we should always remember about lifts. One is the weight, which can cause maybe loss of control. The other thing that can cause loss of control is the speed of the movement, because you have to do it fast. Obviously, that is where the speed of movement can make a difference. And the other thing that is different here is the awkwardness of position. Okay. So the position that your body has to travel, hip down, then you have to take the bar, you have to swing it up. Okay. So as it's sort of going up, you have to move your body around. So it's going into some positions, which are not very standardized. You have to learn to get into those positions. So weightlifting, you have to learn to get into these positions. Like I said earlier, a powerlifter, most general population who train can get into this position and try this. Okay. Majority people will be able to lie down on a gym bench and do this. They'll be able to get under a bar and do. Squatting is not a range which most youth and young people are able to do. The technique is different. So that's why we have to understand. This training here, bodybuilding, obviously there is no standard style of training. A bodybuilder could be somebody who lifts heavy, at the same time it could be somebody who lifts light. But the whole idea is with dieting to get muscles like this, which really pop out, and you're all cut and you're all sort of, strong. So we have to understand that the risk factors are different here. From a risk factor, if you ask injury wise, this is the safest, because here the intention is not to lift weight fast or slow, not at all. Here the intention is to build a body with training and with dieting. Here the risk factor, you can say, is second most, because you still have to aim to lift more. Those who do ego lifting in the gym for no reason, those people obviously also put themselves at risk. Here the risk factor is highest because of the distance, the speed and the positioning of the body. Okay, so we need to understand these three points where each discipline has different risk factors. Now, which one is the best to be used? If I have to ask this question to any strength and conditioning coach or anybody, what type of training should you do? What should you learn from bodybuilding or from powerlifting? Should you follow weightlifting because it's obviously explosive? A lot of times you want to work with athletes to make them explosive, right? We hear that ultimately you want an athlete to be powerful. So now which modality should we choose out of these three if we had to? What's your thoughts on this? Now I'll give you an answer through an example. It's a famous martial artist we all have probably heard, probably the most famous martial artist ever, the first one who made martial arts really famous, Bruce Lee, and he had very good philosophies as well. And one of the philosophies he had about fighting and the style of fighting was that when he was back in the days, in the 70s and late 60s, he found that there were lots of different traditional styles of fighting. There was, karate, there's taekwondo, there's Thai boxing, there's various styles, there's boxing. So people always had this thing, oh, this is better, we guys can beat you, our style can beat you. And then within that there were divisions, between karate there's different styles, between taekwondo there's different sort of region specific styles and so on and so forth. So everybody used to have this thing, which is the best, and people were all sort of saying, my style is better. So what Bruce Lee has always said, is that you incorporate everything. There is no best style of fighting. The one that is effective at that moment in time is the best. So if a punch can do the job, then you don't have to kick. If a kick is necessary to keep the person at a distance, then that is what is to be used. Don't wait to throw a punch. Don't grapple. Don't think I'm a wrestler, so I have to grapple with you. Don't think I'm a boxer, so I have to throw a punch. Use according to the requirement in fighting. So of course fighting has its own philosophy where you use what is required to neutralize the opponent. You don't use what you like. If you like to do a very fancy kick in a fight, and let's assume for some reason we are in a state where we have to fight to survive, it's a life and death matter. Now if you can get away from that, the best is to get away from it without taking any chances. But if you have to fight, then you should be knowing all the various things that you can use, whether it's the legs, whether it's grappling, whether it's the elbow, whether it's your hands, or if there's something else, a stick, you might not even need to use your hands. So the whole idea behind this philosophy and what we can learn and pick from this is that you pick the best from everything. And in I think Bruce Lee's words, what he said was that absorb the best, discard the rest, create what is uniquely yours. So it means take the best from what is there, in different styles of lifting in this case. What doesn't apply for that particular case, don't take it, and then create something which is unique, where you've got the best, like what is said, which is uniquely yours in his statement means, in this case I would say create what is uniquely the athlete's. So absorb the best, discard what is not useful, and create what is unique to that particular athlete, and then you're a good strength and conditioning coach. I hope this lecture has really helped and makes you a better strength and conditioning coach and helps you in designing and creating better programs, and understanding that knowledge is not about one style of thinking or one thought. Okay, just like there's no style of fighting which is the best, you have to do what is useful, and the same applies to so many things, right? There is no best food or the best style of dressing. You have to do what works and what is socially acceptable, what works in a system, what is legal, you have to do it that way, but you have to take the best from everything and make an amalgamation of all of these, and then make sure that that is put into practice, and then you've got the best out there. That is truly the best. where you have the best of everything, then you create something which is unique for the athlete. Thank you for listening. Hope this helps, and hope this makes everybody a better strength and conditioning coach, and me too, it helps me to improve further in my own career so that I can learn more and hopefully teach more as well and better things. Thank you.